business news now, and you've heard of the term decoupling. It's perhaps the most talked about concept of the economic world this year, and it refers to an untangling of financial ties between China and Western economies. So given this, why have the great and good of the business world decamped to the Middle Kingdom this week? Tesla boss Elon Musk landed in the country for the first time in 3 years, meeting no lesser figure than the foreign minister. Meanwhile, JP Morgan chief Jamie Dimon, arguably the world's most powerful banker, is hosting a conference for more than 3,000 of his industry colleagues in Shanghai. And according to a Chinese official, the country is open for business.
China has always welcomed business people from various countries, including Mr. Elon Musk, to visit China to understand the country better and promote mutually beneficial cooperation. China also firmly encourages a high level of opening up to the outside world and is committed to creating a market-oriented, rule of law, and international business environment. We are happy to see foreign enterprises invest and set up businesses in China, to deepen their presence in the Chinese market and to share development opportunities.
And that's Mao Ning, who's a spokesperson for the Chinese Foreign Ministry. For more on this and the rest of the day's business news, including a less than warm economic reaction to the Turkish elections, let's cross over to London to speak to Arise business correspondent Laurie Laird. Good to see you, Laurie. Let's start with this flurry of business activity in China. Is decoupling simply hot air that has now cooled down?
Look, Charles, it seems to be in either Beijing or Shanghai this week. And I do think that the term decoupling is something that people like you and I talk about. It's see it in newspapers. We hear government officials all the time. I do think it's something that is more discussed that is actually happening in practice. I think that so many big industrial companies, Apple is perhaps the most stunning example, have become so big. Supply chains. There's that labor there is ample labor there. And while wages are beginning to rise in China, these supply lines are well established. Many, many companies, and again, Apple in particular, have learned to rely on these supply chains. And they're finding that if they try and ship out of China, they're not finding the skilled labor. They're not finding the breadth of labor, and it could be a very expensive proposition. So decoupling, yes, is something that we hear from politicians. I think we'll continue to hear about it from politicians, but I don't think there's that much going on the ground right now.
And of course, all this, Laurie, coming as the Chinese economy is failing to live up to the post-recovery hype, but it hasn't stopped the business world, has it?
And this is fascinating because you mentioned in your introduction, Charles, that Jamie Dimon, who really head of JP Morgan, one of the most powerful bankers in the world. JP Morgan, of course, you'll remember, was involved in rescuing one of those banks in the US. He is hosting a jamboree in Shanghai of 3,000 people. Now, this is the first time that Jamie Dimon has been back in China since he made a crack in 2021 about JP Morgan probably lasting longer than the Communist Party. You can imagine how well that went down in Chinese circles. This is the first time he is back, and he was greeted by the head of the party in Shanghai. So it looks like he's being rehabilitated. But because the Chinese recovery has been so weak, most of the international banks in China are losing money. So many of these international banks have put a lot of money into China, salivating at this growing middle class, salivating at selling them financial products. And while most of them made money in 2021, almost none made money in 2022. JP Morgan, the exception there. And yet all of these bankers are convening in China. And one of the things that Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan said today at a Bloomberg interview was that the Chinese government probably needs to watch itself. It needs to be careful about spurious regulation. It may need to give some fiscal stimulus. So while all these bankers are here, they are acknowledging the fact that China's recovery from the COVID lockdowns has not been nearly as robust as hoped.
Well, Laurie, let's turn to Turkey. Investors don't seem particularly happy about the results of the election there.
Absolutely. Record low, although most of the movement was after the result of the first election 2 weeks ago. There had really been hopes amongst investors that the opposition leader may win. There's simply absolutely no confidence in President Erdogan and his economic policies. So we saw the lira hit a record low yesterday in response to the second round of the election. Seems to have stabilized today, but is on the downside. Turkish stocks under pressure. And essentially, Charles, foreign investors have fled the nation. 10 years ago, foreign investors held about 30% of Turkish government debt. They're now holding a single digit percentage-wise. So foreign investors simply have absolute economic management.
Yeah, we lost you a little bit there, but I think we got most of what you said. Briefly, Laurie, we've got about a minute or so. Let's turn to the UK, where you are, the leading business lobby trying to clean up its act. But can the CBI survive?
In a word, Charles, I don't think the CBI can. This is the Confederation of British Industry, and it was previously one of the biggest lobbying groups in the UK. It has been accused of having a toxic culture. This is their new chief executive, Ray Newton-Smith, recently appointed, but she had been the chief economist before that, during which time there were a number of accusations that women made of sexual harassment, even rape, at a party event. As a result, companies have deserted the CBI in droves. The government is not having any meetings with the CBI. If you can't meet with the government, there's not really a lot of hope for a lobby group. They are having a big in June, but there have been reports on Sky News, which is a reputable source, saying that they have actually identified a city law firm to advise on a possible bankruptcy.
Laurie, thanks very much indeed. Laurie Laird, a Rise business correspondent, talking to me from London there, and apologies for that shaky line.